Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Got some free time here in the middle of the week, so I thought I would give you a little more information in the Meyer case. Some of the things I'm currently studying right now in the book, The Goblet of Truth. Billy was able to pull the first 14 chapters of this writing out of what he calls the universal storage banks. Evidently, our universe and our planet has storage banks of information that are open and accessible, and if you have the capability, you can literally pull that information down. We're going to start out talking about something the Goblet of Truth calls the Dark Order. And I know a lot of you have probably heard of the New World Order that I guess President Bush Sr. talked about the first, and many people in the alternative community talk about the New World Order. It's called by a slightly different title in the Meyer case. It's called the Secret Order of Darkness. So I will read to you a little bit from the Goblet of Truth, and then we'll talk about what that means. However, all the items named here only represent the start, because in secret there is a mighty organization of the governing class and mightful ones, as well as many other of their obedient lackeys, emerging from amongst your humanity, who are creating a secret order of darkness with their own evil laws and ordinances, and who are bent on hatred for the poor and weak and against the economically imprisoned and all normal citizens. So let's define some of these terms and find out what Billy's talking about here. It says there's an organization that is coming out of the governing class, which is referred to by the term the Secret Order of Darkness. This dark order wants more money and entire mastery over our earth. A secret society is a club or an organization whose activities, events, and inner functioning are concealed from non-members. One of the secret societies in our colleges is called Skull and Bones. When Billy was a very young boy and he met with Swath talked to him about something called the third millennium, and we are here on the earth are entered into the third millennium. It's a time of maliciousness and confusion that is spreading over the earth. It's a time when we could have a third world war, a third global conflagration. In the third millennium, Swath told Billy that our leaders would become megalomaniacal, that they would take away our rights of self-determination, they would overemphasize their own importance, and unfortunately the people would not oppose this tyranny that is forming, and the people would become obtuse. And obtuse means to be annoyingly insensitive or slow to understand. They would also become indolent. Indolent is lazy, unwilling to put forth the effort to learn, and that the people of the earth would become very indifferent. And that's what's allowing this secret order, this secret society, to spread their evil supremacy over the world. Now, Billy also has talked about, in the same writing, The Goblet of Truth, about something called a consciousness-conditioned tyranny. And he brought this up when discussing the Roman Empire and the Roman Catholic Church. A tyranny is the arbitrary or unrestrained exercise of power. Let me read that definition again. A tyranny is the arbitrary or unrestrained exercise of power. We have a tyranny, I think, forming in the United States now. Arbitrary means whimsical, or if a person in power just so happens to think something should be done, it does get done that way. And there's nothing to restrain the tyranny that's forming in our country and around the world. The organization, this dark secret order that's forming, has what's called obedient lackeys who are appearing out of our population. A lackey is typically a derogatory term used for a servant with little or no self-respect, who belittles himself in order to gain an advantage. And Svath warned us about this time, this time which really began when we dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And this time has the potential to last 800 years until the people of the earth finally relearn what's called the creational natural laws, or the way the universe operates. The Dark Order that's forming now has its own evil laws and ordinances. An ordinance is a rule established by an organization to regulate itself. One of the things that this Dark Order is doing is spreading hatred everywhere. And we see it most poignantly expressed in the group called ISIS, which probably has Western backing as well. ISIS is the Islamic State. It's the group that is forming in the Middle East, and we're seeing the violence from ISIS spreading over the globe. This hatred that these groups, whether it's ISIS or whether it's this secret order of darkness, this hatred that's spreading over the earth is like a poison. In the context of biology, poisons are substances that can cause disturbances in organisms, usually by a chemical reaction or other activity on a molecular scale. When a sufficient amount of this poison has been absorbed by an organism. So you could think of this hatred that's being spread by the secret order of darkness as a kind of poison that's going everywhere. It's a sickness that's gone all across our society. And one of the symptoms of the sickness that is spreading over humanity is an idleness that is forming in people. Now, I talked about the obtuseness and the indolence of people, but there's also an idleness that is forming in humanity. In describing a person or machine, something that's idle means the act of nothing or no work. A computer processor or a communication circuit is sometimes described as idle when it is not being used by any program, application, or message. And because people, they just don't know what to do because of what's happening in the earth. Let me read a second here from the Goblet of Truth. And you human beings of earth, both young and old, are the ones who can no longer set down any roots in your life. You wander demoralized and hopeless, bereft of home, of work, with the result that you fight yourselves in all things, and you hate your present existence. Now, what does it mean to fight yourself? Well, in the book called The Might of Thoughts, it talks about our consciousness as being like a garden, and that we have to protect our consciousness. We have to weed our consciousness, just like we have to weed our gardens. We get unhealthy thoughts that tend to repeat and repeat in our consciousness. And the best thing that we can do when those unhealthy thoughts start to appear is to yank them up by the roots and cast them out. Sometimes, though, it's good just for a short time to look at those repeating thoughts and try to understand why they're repeating. But once you understand that, get rid of them. Billy states that the human being must take the effort to clarify his or her thoughts, which they then can become more valuable, more purposive, and productive. And the clarification of your thoughts can come when you reiterate things again and again. And as you clarify your thoughts, you'll make a situation become less confused and more comprehensible. And we should practice clarifying our thoughts. Now, when a garden is started, there's plant life in the garden. And our consciousness is like a garden. If it is not correctly maintained, there will be wildly growing negative thoughts, which can have a confusing and destructive effect. And we're already seeing that. There are wild and growing negative thoughts that are permeating throughout our culture, particularly in the military veterans. There is a problem that continues to get worse and worse with our military veterans committing suicide. The United States military veteran suicide epidemic is an ongoing phenomenon regarding a reported high rate of suicide among U.S. military veterans. 6,500 military personnel killed themselves in 2012. And in 2013, the United States Department of Veterans Affairs released a study that covered suicides from 1999 to 2010, which showed that roughly, this is an incredible statistic, it's hard to even understand, roughly 22 veterans were committing suicide every day. One veteran kills himself every 65 minutes. Now, why would our veterans be killing themselves? One of the difficulties happens in our consciousness when it appears that information percolates up from the subconscious. And sometimes the information that percolates up from the subconsciousness creates a state of cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is very uncomfortable for a human being. That's when in cognitive dissonance we have more than one thought at the same time about something. We have thoughts that are in conflict. In psychology, cognitive dissonance is the mental stress or discomfort experienced by an individual who holds two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values at the same time. We are a society now that has contradictory beliefs, ideas, and values. And we are being confronted by this new information that conflicts with existing beliefs, ideas, or values. And this is probably most dramatically seen by our veterans, who have now been, for the past 20 or 30 years, been used by our government to fight various wars where the security of the United States was not really the basis for the war. We've had the Vietnam War, we've had the Korean conflict, we've had the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. Many other motivations got us into these wars, whether it was for oil, natural gas, whether it was to keep our currency alive and valuable. We've seen horrible things done in warfare. We've seen the dropping of the nuclear bombs in World War II. We've seen another kind of nuclear war that's been the use of depleted uranium in the Gulf, which destroys the human genome, destroys our genetics. And our veterans have seen this closer than anyone. They've seen the duplicity of our government, the duplicity of our leaders our government is more and more being influenced by this dark order. A recent analysis found the suicide rate among veterans of about 30 per 100,000 population every year. Suicide among veterans is about double the normal rate now. However, when the comparison was not adjusted for age and sex, the total number of suicides differed by age group. 31% of these suicides were made by veterans 49 and younger, while 69% with veterans age 50 and older. So the cognitive dissonance that's forming in people is most profoundly affecting the older. Suicides of veterans is primarily male, with 97% of the suicides being male in the United States, for whatever reason. So we have a problem in our consciousness again. The person that feels that the only way out of their problem, that has to kill themselves, is suffering from a problem in their consciousness. Now, in Billy's book, The Might of the Thoughts, I think it's in the German Macht der Gedanken, Elizabeth Moosbrugger described the book this way. She said, "So the book which lies before you is dedicated to a humankind that is ill in its consciousness, so that it finds again the creational natural way which it lost long ago." So we are a humanity that's ill in our consciousness. Semyase, how did she put it? She says, "You're an insane society rushing headlong to your own destruction, and only a mass change of consciousness can avert the coming disaster." One of the German words associated to this illness in the consciousness is called Erstarrung, which means to get very bad, out of control of the good human nature. On its own, negative thinking leads to Erstarrung just as much as purely positive thinking does. The neutral, positive, equalized mode of thinking is needed to repair the psyche. And Billy goes on for many pages in The Might of the Thoughts about how to repair the psyche. So what is the psyche? We have a material consciousness and a spiritual consciousness. The material consciousness is controlled, the thoughts and feelings of the material consciousness is controlled by this block or this factor called the psyche. Now in our spiritual consciousness, our human spirit is controlled, the thoughts and the feelings of the human spirit is controlled by something called the Gemut. The material consciousness can become ill. It can become damaged. The spiritual consciousness cannot. The spirit form is completely invulnerable to any kind of harm from the material world whatsoever. So that's the good news. No matter what trouble you're having with your material consciousness during this lifetime, your spirit form is completely unaffected by this problem. And in case you haven't heard this in the show before, we reincarnate millions and even billions of times during this evolutionary, 7-stage evolutionary process. Every time the spirit form reincarnates in a child, we get a new material consciousness. So if you're having profound problems during this lifetime, be sure that you won't carry these issues into your next lifetime. The spirit form needs a material consciousness to evolve. And in each physical lifetime, we have a new material consciousness, and the child has to grow up again. Even it will receive inspiration from the wisdom of its predecessor personalities, which are located in the subconsciousness. But we also get impulses from the storage banks. And being open to the impulses from the storage banks is part of the returning to a healthy state of mind. Because the storage banks of the universal consciousness produces signals, and they're of a neutral positive nature, and they're healing. They're very healthy. So the consciousness, again, is like a garden, and if it's not correctly maintained, there will be wildly growing negative thoughts, which can have this confusing and destructive effect. These wildly growing thoughts are much like destructive weeds in our garden, so we need to reach in and pull those weeds up. Otherwise, these wildly negative thoughts, they can develop their own life, exactly as wild plants. So you have to reach in there and pull those thoughts out of your consciousness. But the reason that the psychically disturbed human beings of all kinds only see black and black, and therefore they only see negatively, it's because the perceptive ability becomes very limited, and the world of thoughts falls prey to this limitation, and it's only able to move in a narrow framework which allows limited and negative perceptions. So that's why the studying the Meyer material is so important, because it broadens your frame of reference. And if you don't broaden your frame of reference, you can be forced into this narrow cycle of repeating thoughts. Let me once again read something that Billy talks about, which really conflicts with our religions, but I think it's important to remember. Something like a universal evil does not exist, but there exists an energy block around the planet that consists of religious delusion and nonsense and other negative thoughts emanated by human beings who are thinking along such lines, the negative repeating thoughts. The people who are living and held in bondage by these belief systems are constantly influenced by the negative block of energy, like in a vicious cycle. So the Meyer material says entities like devil, Satan, demons are not real, but without exceptions are figments of this religious delusion and imagination. Unfortunately, we will not break the cycle of this religious delusional information until about 800 years from now. I mean, on the larger scale. And on the larger scale, people will start to occupy themselves with the realization that there is truth. But until the broad masses succeed in profoundly thinking about the truth, much more time will pass. So what is the truth? What is the effective truth as the Meyer information describes it? Excuse me just for a second here. The effective truth is described this way. It says, the life-giving energy of creation is attempting to come into harmonious concord with all people, with the entire planet, with the entire universe. The word concord means to come into agreement, to fit together. So this life-giving energy of creation is emanating from the storage banks. It's emanating from creation if we can open our senses to it. And if we can, one of the best therapies is to spend time in nature, to go out into nature. If you can find a preserved natural place to spend time, it can be restorative. It can restore health to your consciousness, because these neutral positive impulses are coming from creation, because creation is attempting with its life-giving energy to come into a harmonious concord, to come into agreement, to fit together with all people, with the world and the universe. And if you think of what harmony means, the way I envision it myself is like an orchestra that plays a chord, all these different instruments, plays this beautiful resolving chord at the same time to come into a state of resolution. And Billy, as a young boy, experienced these impulses very profoundly at a very young age when he woke up and he crawled out of a lower window in his bedroom. And he felt these impulses, which came from what you could call the universal storage banks. And he described it this way. He said it happened during a mild night in May in the year 1941, and if I remember rightly, it was around 3 a.m. in the night of Sunday, May the 4th. In this case, this is how it was all etched in my memory, and indeed, because everything which took place at that time was a special experience, I slept and I dreamt that I saw my body lying asleep in the bed. Thinking about it in my sleep, I made the observation that I really was asleep, which somehow amazed me and moved me to wake up deliberately. A little drowsy, I looked out the window, through which I saw the clear starry sky, so I rose from my bed and went to the window and climbed out, as it was almost at ground level. Outside I sat down on the simple bench which stood against the wall of the house which my father had built, and I could not see the moon. However, the sky was clear and wrapped in a velvety black, and millions of stars shone down from the firmament. Now, one thing that Billy's doing here is observing nature, and he's gone into a neutral state of mind, and he's just observing. He's not necessarily thinking. He's not thinking positive or negative thoughts. He's gotten into observation. And that's part of what's important in the restorative phase, and to be open to these impulses. And he says, for a few minutes I sat there like that and looked up to the stars while pondering, and in my thoughts, flying far into the universe. However, suddenly something peculiar happened inside of me, which from the next moment irrevocably changed my whole life. Strangely touched, I looked at my hands and body, and I could only vaguely recognize them. So I touched my body and felt it, and then I heard my own voice say, my life is made out of the love of creation. Now, I talk about this a fair amount, that the universe radiates this love. It's not a romantic love. It's described this way, Billy writes it as, the incredible splendor of nature is a visible expression of the love of creation, and creation radiates love. So that at every point, at every moment, in every place, we can experience the radiating love of creation if we open our senses to it. So again, Billy says, I looked at my hands and my body and I could only vaguely recognize them. So I touched my body and I felt it, and then I heard my own voice say, my life is made out of the love of creation. And I could not explain why I said that, and which power led me to speak those words. A slight shiver came over me, although the night was quite warm, and then I noticed also I felt peculiar. Nevertheless, I was not frightened. So Billy, as a very young boy, experienced, again, the radiating love, the impulses from the universal storage banks. Because remember, creation is with its life-giving energy, is trying to come into harmonious concord with all people, the entire world, the entire universe. Because as Thoth told Billy, Thoth being the first extraterrestrial mentor that Billy had, that everything in the universe is one, and it's all bound together. And in the wonderful passage in the Goblet of Truth that I continually repeat, a passage that's entitled What the Truth Knows to Say, describes this oneness of everything. And it says, rivers, stones, plants, animals, bushes, trees, everything that crawls and flies on the earth is a life form with a spirit form. And these spirit forms are on a journey through time which involve many, many lifetimes. And that death is just a passage to rebirth. Rebirth into the world of pure spirit. And many of these creatures are wise and heightened, which communicate with one another through these psychic swinging waves, and they're all connected. And if we observe nature, we can see the evidence of these psychic swinging waves in the way that groups of living Weisenheiten in nature, they move as a unit. Whether it's a flock of birds moving from tree to tree in unison, or a swarm of insects, they move in unison. Or a herd of deer or cattle as they move together, or a school of fish. And it's because they're all connected by these psychic swinging waves. And in fact, there is a collective unconsciousness among humanity. And that's why when a researcher discovers something on one side of the earth, another researcher a couple days later will discover the same thing on the other side of the earth. And it's because we're really all connected in ways that we don't understand yet. Now, Billy, again, he says he looked up to the stars, and this is again as a very young boy, and he recognized that the stars were distant suns in the vast outer space that shone by means of their own power, by themselves, even though they were created from the light of the love of creation, as is everything in the whole universe. Now, what is creation? This is the term that we have confused with the term God. You see, the universal consciousness is the superintelligence which maintains our universe, which actually began in the Big Bang and will go through an evolutionary cycle that our human minds cannot even comprehend. We are currently in what's called the first great time. And a great time consists of about, if I remember correctly, 316 trillion years. And roughly half of it is an expansion phase, which maybe 105, 110 trillion years, and then a contraction phase also lasts about 110 trillion years, and then after the universe is contracted back to its roughly, I guess, its original state, which was a flea-sized ball of energy, it will go dormant for a while, and this whole process begins again. We are the first stage of our universe's evolvement. We are in our first stage because we have a material belt. And there are 7 belts in our universe in all, and then the core belt, if you go out 4 layers from the core, there's the material belt. The material belt consists of all the galaxies and all the stars. And for example, in our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, there's something like 100,000 light years of space. And there may be as many as 200 billion stars. And the vastness of our Milky Way is incredible. And the Meyer material says there are 2,600,000 roughly human civilizations in this Milky Way community. They are in a some are Pleiades. That's a finer dimension in a different space-time figure. They live on a world called Era. And Era, from my estimation, is like the Earth was in a more pristine state, maybe 5 or 6 centuries ago, before we had destroyed our ozone, before we had exploded 2,000 atomic bombs in our atmosphere, before we had created the nuclear disaster that we have going on in Chernobyl and most of all Fukushima, before we had filled the earth with 8 billion plus people that are destroying nature, before we had cut down our rainforests, before we had depleted our aquifers and depleted the nutrients in all of our soil by over-farming to support the giant population that exists on our planet. The Plejaren live in harmony with nature, and a population of only about 530 million people, roughly. They do not build roads. They do not mine their planet. They don't do fracking. They don't take oil and natural gas and coal out of their world. They live in harmony with nature. They're what the Meyer material would refer to as a 4th and 5th level society. They have what's called real life and creational wisdom and accomplishments and technologies which boggle our imagination and challenge our belief systems. And we're kind of in a crisis of our belief systems, and that's why there's so much cognitive dissonance in the world, because people are searching for the truth. And we cannot get truth from our organizations anymore, whether they be educational organizations, governmental organizations, or religious organizations. Very, very little truth. So we have a crisis. We are having a crisis of our consciousness. And because of that crisis, this spirit form, this very, very ancient spirit form, who the extraterrestrials refer to as an Okodamian, has incarnated on the earth once again as a prophet. And he has been, in previous lifetimes, Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, and Muhammad. And in this lifetime, he's a humble, one-armed farmer who lives about 52 minutes east of Zurich in a little town, a tiny mountain village called Hinterschmidruti. And he has written 39 books and over 600 booklets, which are basically transcripts of conversations he's had with these extraterrestrial humans. And his writings, the writings of Edward Albert Meyer, that I've been reading some of them for you today, answer all the big questions in life. Who are we? Where do we come from? What is the purpose of our life? What are the other extraterrestrial human civilizations out there like? What will happen in our future? What will happen in our past? And the mission during this lifetime is to preserve in written form this ancient universal teaching called the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of life. And it has certain principles associated with it. It talks about and teaches what the creation is, what the universal consciousness is. It also talks about the human spirit, what the human spirit is. It talks about what this whole process of reincarnation is about. It explains what it means to learn to take control of your thoughts. And taking control of our thoughts is really critical nowadays because we're in this time of cognitive dissonance. We're in this time of tyranny that's spreading over the entire earth, the confusion and the maliciousness that's spreading over the earth. This time of tyranny, remember, tyranny is the arbitrary and unrestrained use of authority. So we're all coming into this, and because of this unrestrained use of authority, many people are feeling great despair, and they feel very hopeless. And part of the goal of this program is to help people once again restore hope. Because remember, you will live many, many lifetimes, and you will eventually evolve. We eventually all evolve into these higher levels. So take that as hope. Let me read again from how it all began. Already at the age of 4, this great recognition instantly changed my life. And we should all once again have this great recognition. Because after I was familiarized with this insight and understanding by means of the impulses from the storage banks, these impulses are signals which come from the universal storage banks, from the planetary storage banks. And I also learned who I really was, what I had to learn and do in my life, and what my life task was. And the one common life task that we all have is to grow in wisdom. Wisdom is a kind of knowledge that produces energy. And when we grow in wisdom, we help the whole universe to evolve. Love and wisdom go together. The creation and its laws are love and wisdom at the same time. And the love that we're talking about is not affective love, not mushy romantic love, but effective love, which is constant, which goes towards all living creatures, to all people, to all life, and it's a continuous kind of love. But Billy goes on here, he says, also I learned who I really was, what I had to learn and do in my life, what my life task was. I looked at human beings, animals, and nature, as well as all existing things in a completely new way. And I suddenly felt a great astonishment within myself about that, which I now discovered. Suddenly I saw myself in everything, in every fellow human being, in every flower or other plant, in every tree and shrub, in every animal, in snow, in water, in the earth, in the lightning and thunder, in clouds, in wind and sunshine. So what is Billy meaning here that he's seeing himself in everything? Well, one of the ways to decipher these great and profound mysteries in this information is compare different areas of these writings together. Now, one thing that Semjase said, Semjase was Billy's third extraterrestrial mentor. She said that even your terrestrial philosophers have said that everything is within the human. That the entire universe was within the human at the microscopic level and at the macroscopic level. Now, Billy's seeing himself in everything. Now, what we have is repeating patterns in nature. We have the spiraling of our DNA. We see spiraling of seashells. We see spirals that form in rivers as the water flows. We see spiraling arms of the galaxy. We see repeating patterns. We see the branching structure in our circulatory system, the branching structure in growing plants and trees, a branching structure that forms Even in lightning bolts, we see rotation in every aspect of nature. Rotations of electrons around the nucleus of the atom, the rotating planets around the stars, the rotating solar systems around the galaxy. We see rotation everywhere, these repeating patterns in nature. And so perhaps Billy is seeing these repeating patterns in nature. He said, "Suddenly I saw myself in everything, in every fellow human being, in every flower or other plant, in every tree and shrub, in every animal, in snow and water, in the earth, in lightning and thunder and clouds and wind and sunshine, because everything was and is connected in true creational love and forms a unity which can never be separated. Even life and death are woven into it and are inseparably entwined with each other. And exactly as a result of this connection, which was instantly clear to me, everything is mixed and connected in infinitely various ways through which innumerable manifestations of life and existences were created and exist and will continue to be created." Now, this is part of the understanding of what the universal consciousness is. It's a neutral positive entity. It's really neither good nor evil. It builds universes as a part of its own evolution, and it creates human spirit forms as also a part of its own evolution. The creation doesn't look over us in terms of directing us or guiding us per se, except for those impulses which come from the storage banks. You're responsible for yourself. The term God as a religious deity per se doesn't really exist from the perspective of the Maya material. The word God goes back to ancient times, to ancient Lyrian words like Ishwish or King of Wisdom. And in ancient times, gods were always people who had incredible abilities, more highly evolved in some ways, people who were on the earth in ancient times. In fact, the whole idea of monotheism began in ancient Egypt. There was a pharaoh named Amenhotep IV who renamed himself to Akhenaten when he started to worship Aten. Aten was really the life-giving qualities of the sun. So it was kind of a confused thing. And they also worshipped Ra. But at least they had the notion of the life-giving aspects of creation being there. So, and I've talked about this many times before in history, how the Giza intelligence is formed. Remember, according to Maya material, in ancient times, the Great Pyramid was built some 73,000 years ago. And it was built in part by extraterrestrial humans that existed on the Earth, some extraterrestrial humans from Orion, and our Great Pyramid is some 481 feet tall. However, the Maya information tells us that at one time it was 152 meters high. 152 meters is about 500 feet in height. And each meter of height in the Great Pyramid corresponded to 1 million kilometers of Earth to Sun distance at that time. And the number of elements, 280, multiplied in sevenfold form, will also give you the speed of light, but that's really neither here nor there. But what was the extraterrestrials' involvement in the creation of this Great Pyramid? Now, there were extraterrestrials here from the Orion constellation who directed the building of the Great Pyramid, and that's why we see the three Great Pyramids in Egypt pointing to the stars of Orion. And a very small part of the work of the Great Pyramid was done with the aid of certain telekinetic devices and forces. Much of the work of the Great Pyramid was formed by about 200,000 workers plus animals over a time period of many, many decades. There is evidence of the extraterrestrial involvement in the great construction of the Great Pyramid. And Georgios Tsoukalos has often talked about this. He says that the Al-Hittat, this ancient Egyptian writing, says that the Great Pyramid was built with the help of the Watchers who came down from the sky. And in one of Colonel Wendell Stevens' books, it talks about the doctor, I think his name was Lawrence Kennedy, who was given access to one of the stepped pyramids in Egypt, which had a great mural in it, which showed these cylindrical ships hovering over the Great Pyramid. So there were humans here that guided the construction, that directed the construction of the Great Pyramids all over the earth. They were built across the world about 73,000 years ago, and also about 36,000 years ago. There were multiple uses of the Great Pyramid over time. King Seleucus, because of visions of his son Sarid, used the Great Pyramid as a refuge for his people to survive a great flood which occurred in 9500 BC. So the Great Pyramid has been used as a refuge, and the utilization of the pyramids, they've also been used as tombs, as our historians have said. There were at one time, I think they've been destroyed, these old cubical constructions far below the Giza Pyramid, were the home of the Giza intelligences. And I started to talk about these Giza intelligences. Probably the first person in the lineage of the Giza intelligences was an extraterrestrial man named Eris the 11th. And Eris the 11th was one of these rulers who had a son called Jehovan. And Jehovan ruled the earth about 3,600 years ago. But Jehovan, some of these extraterrestrial rulers were megalomaniacal, and he let himself be called the creator. And he ruled for centuries. He had a son named Jehav. His son Jehav killed his father, Jehovan, and he ruled wickedly. The Maya material says that Jehav screamed for blood and revenge, and he let himself be proclaimed as creator and celebrated as such. Now, these ancient gods in our history were tyrannical, and I think our psychology here on the earth is traumatized by the rule of these ancient gods. What does it say even in our scriptures? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So we've been put under this trauma by these ancient rulers. Now, according to the Maya information, allegedly, Jehav sired 3 sons. They were named Erisam, Ta, and Salam. And then Erisam murdered his father Jehav, and I'll read what happened next. Erisam secretly returned to the earth, settled down with his army in the land of Egypt, in the old cubicle constructions which had existed here unused for more than 70,000 years. Deep in the interior of the earth and deep below the pyramids, they established themselves securely, whereby they converted the rooms and constructions deep below the great pyramids of Giza as a center for their wicked purposes. Billy, when he was about 16 years old, was taken far below the Giza plateau by an extraterrestrial woman named Asket. And he got to see these old cubicle constructions when they were still here. I think they've since been destroyed by the Pleiaren. But he saw this very, very ancient spacecraft, which somehow these Giza intelligences got below the Earth. And he saw this giant hallway with light coming from everywhere. And he saw these artifacts which looked... The Giza intelligence was very skilled at creating these artifacts, these religious artifacts. One of these artifacts looked very much like the cross of Christ. It wasn't the cross of Emmanuel. It was a very, very close replica that would fool our scientists today. Very, very convincing. So what the Giza intelligence did is they were, well, let me read what they did. From where they and their descendants since then tried to realize their tyrannical plans, but as of now, without noteworthy success, although their way of obtaining lying and intrigues was by wrong teachings and leading astray of the uncorrupted earth humans through religious teachings of madness and cults and many other evil machinations. So we here on the earth have been influenced by these extraterrestrial groups in ways that have been very, very deleterious to our spiritual growth, and now we have this innate confusion in many aspects. I think we've probably talked enough this afternoon. I'm glad I had time to do this. I appreciate everyone listening. Please come to exopoliticsohio.us, Google Ohio Exopolitics, and look at the website exopoliticsohio.us. We have all kinds of archives from the Revolution Radio Show, from BTR shows, and I think you'll enjoy all of them. Please, listening to the show, learn from this information. Remember, your consciousness is like a garden, so keep it watered, keep the weeds from growing in it. I'd like to thank you all for listening. My name is Mark Snyder. This is Ohio Exopolitics, and we'll be back. Have a good day.